This is Alan Ballier with the Biodynamics Now podcast. We're on part two of how Rudolf Steiner's medical lectures informed his agricultural lectures with our guest, the biodynamic teacher, Glenn Atkinson. Glenn, how you doing?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Alan.
Good. Can I ask you a quick question before you give us a short review and
Sure.
start part two? This is just something that's bothered me and just sort of came up in these discussions of using biodynamic preps to do remediation in Puerto Rico, and it just points to, I guess, some uncooked rice in my understanding of what Steiner was talking about. So it seems to me that there was some point in the agricultural lectures where Steiner perceived that people in the audience were thinking that the preps were bacterial inoculants, and he actually did the reverse of begging the question there, I guess, and came out and said, "You'll think of this as bacteria, but it's definitely not bacteria." And he said that, right?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, well, go on.
So in my own experience, for example, the first biodynamic farming and food conference that I hosted, we had a organic farming molecular biologist PhD who really knew nature inside and out, but he was super hippie organic and not a biodynamic person. And he attended a number of the lectures, and he said, "Alan, believe in all the formative forces you want to, but I'm just here to tell you that if I was going to give you benign bacteria to inoculate your land with, my description of how to apply it in a low-tech fashion would be exactly the same as what you do with 500." And so I've always had that going in my head also. So what do you say, Glenn?
hmm So, it's not that the preps don't have bacteria in them. And there's plenty of proof that they do. It's just that his image is that the bacteria live in an environment, and if that environment isn't there, then the bacteria will actually die out. And so you can, in a sense, inoculate the soil with whatever you like. If the basic, in a sense, mineral environment, mineral and humic environment there to support them, you're going to have to just keep inoculating every year. And this is really the point of Albrecht, the Albrecht papers, is that he's a microbiologist. And so when we talk about the Albrecht mineral ratios in science, which is, calcium of 70% and magnesium of around 11% and potassium of 3% and sodium 1%, when we're saying we want to aim for those mineral levels in our soil, what we're really saying is that these are the mineral levels that will most support biological life. And that if we can get to those levels, then all of the work we do with biology will work and be self-sustaining. And that was Steiner's attitude. It's focus on the environment, focus on the big picture, make the environment for the biology to exist in. So that's really the way to look at it.
Okay, well that's a lot easier to look at it that way then. Okay,
Yeah,
so I appreciate that. Do you want to give us a recap of the previous session and then lead us forward?
yeah, sure. So the whole sort of premise of this talk is that the agriculture lectures are quite difficult for everybody to understand, and I think part of that context is that Steiner was quite ill when he gave these lectures, and there's even stories of how people suspected that he wouldn't be able to even give the course because he was so sick, and so the course itself is a little bit patchy. I think he got all the information or most of the information that he would like to put there. He put there, but it's a bit unorganized, and there seems to be little bits missing, little segues that are missing from one piece to the next. So it's quite confusing. Now, when we look at the medical lectures, though, which are given around the same years in the last 4 or 5 years of Steiner's life, and there's about 100 of them, we get a bigger context. We get a bigger field that we can sort of put the agriculture lectures into. And by sort of cross-referencing what he says in all those lectures, we can get a greater clarity about what's being suggested in the agriculture course. Now, last time I gave a bit of an introduction into his worldview, and one of the key points that I made was that we need to find the 4 basic activities in everything we do. In wherever we're looking in agriculture or in plant growth or in soil or anywhere, we need to try and find how these 4 basic activities of the stars, the planets, the atmosphere and the earth, how those 4 activities are sort of put together to make up whatever we're doing. Now, in the PDF that I have provided, that's on the website there, there's plate number 10 gives an example of 14 or so different places, like the body systems or the soil, the plant, the forms of plants, fruit. We can find these 4 activities that take place. Now, so that's the whole game, and what is in a sense a bit different to the standard biodynamic story that we're coming across now. In the standard story, we're only looking for 2 things, basically. We're looking for an expansive and a contractive element, and we can call that 500 or 501, or we call it cosmic and earthly. But one way or another, we're just trying to find, how this expansion and contraction are working together. But in the medical lectures, he goes further. Well, he goes further in the agriculture lectures too. But in the medical lectures, he's very clear about how when we look into the body of the human, or the body of cultural individuality, as he calls it, and we look at the soil, and then we look at the above part of the plant, that initially there's these 2 parts that are there. And so in the head region, which we can see as the contractive element, we can see that there is a contractive and an expansive element in the head, and the same in the metabolic system. Now, sadly, these images aren't really provided until the 8th lecture. You get the actual pictures drawn very, very clearly, and so in the PDF we can see the plate number 15, 16, and 17 in a sense give us these images of how in the root section we have the spirit or the stars, in a sense, coming from the earth. And of course, the physical root itself is the physical activity. And then above, he draws this picture where there's this little cloud over the top of the plant, and he identifies that as the astral or the planetary activity. And then, of course, the leaves of the plant is this etheric or water activity that's taking place there. And so what we get in that picture is that in the plant, there are these 4 activities, and 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom, and the way that this occurs, of course, is that the activity that would be naturally above works down into the below, and the activity that's naturally below works up into the above. And so this is where we then get that picture that's on plate 17, where we can identify that we have this expansion and contraction taking place in the head, and expansion and contraction taking place in the belly. And this is then becomes this sort of basis of health, that in our belly we can stimulate one or the other. We can stimulate the contraction in the belly, or we can stimulate the expansion in the belly, and so a really good example of that in the medical lectures is when he talks about kidneys and a shrunken kidney. And this, of course, brings us to equisetum, which is one of the suggestions in the agriculture course in the 6th lecture when he's talking about fungal problems. He just basically gives this description of far too much watery activity coming from the soil. And he says, well, use equisetum and it'll sort of be opposite to the activity I've just described. And if you want to understand it, go and look and see how equisetum works with the kidneys. And of course, I think you did put that equisetum article up.
It's up, yes,
on the website. So the point being there that for some particular reason, the expansive process in the metabolic system is disturbed, and so that kidneys tend to contract, and so the equisetum actually brings in the astral activity, which is a moving activity, to stimulate the water activity, which is that expansive activity, and by that astral stimulating the etheric, we get that expansion in the metabolic system again. So this is the stories that can arise once we sort of look at it from the medical point of view. Now, while I'm going past here, I would like to just enlarge on this picture just a little bit. And in my equisetum article, I've sort of put the story as if there's these subplots. So we've got the big story, and then we sort of find, oh, look, there's another story just under it, and then there's another story under that as well. And the story I've just told is sort of like subplot 2, where we've got this expansion and contraction taking place within the belly, as it were. And subplot number 3, of course, is that when we look into that belly, we can see that the words he uses is cosmic substance for the astral activity and earthly forces for the etheric activity. Now, these are the dominant activities in that region because, of course, not only is the astral sitting there, but the spirit is also there. But it's a secondary influence. In the belly, the astral is the dominant influence, and the directive spirit activity is sitting there as a secondary player. And similarly with the earthly forces and the etheric activity, the physical is a secondary player. And so those secondary players can cause disturbance. It is possible that we will have a strong spirit activity such as warmth, a too high a warmth process taking place in our garden, and that will overpower the light process that we would be looking for in that astral cosmic substance stream. And so similarly, when we look into the head region and we come and look for how the spirit and physical activity are working in the head, we can see that the spirit activity is the cosmic forces, but the astral is this secondary activity that's sitting there in the head. And similarly, the etheric plays a secondary activity. So what we can see there is that there's 4 activities in the head region, in the belly region, but also there's 4 activities in this metabolic region. Now, when we've got more parts of the game, we can become much more sophisticated in our understanding, interpretation, and therefore participation in that game. And so instead of just having 2 players where we have an expansion and a contraction, we've actually got 12 players now. And so I trust that, that image is is good enough to show this higher level of sophistication that we can bring to our biodynamic understanding and also our biodynamic solutions. Now to a large degree, that art still needs to be developed within biodynamics. But I guess part of the idea of that Equisetum article was to show how these thoughts can be used. And with that, of course, it opens up the Veleda medicine, the anthroposophical medical company Veleda and also Vala have been making remedies based on these ideas for the last 80 years or so. And so, of course, they've got a tremendous range of remedies that we may be able to use in agriculture.
Okay.
And to me, that's one of the big positives is that in the Equisetum article, I used Bidor, this product Bidor, which is essentially quartz crystals and iron sulfate all ground up together. And Steiner uses that as a sort of a headache remedy, but a general anti-inflammatory remedy. And in a sense, it's acting to get the head forces and push them back down into the belly. And you know, if we think of the summertime, when we've got a lot of light and a lot of warmth going on above the ground, and pushing too strongly, and this is the basis for getting pests, for example, beetles and all sorts of other chewing insects. This Bidor remedy, pushing from the ground upwards, could well be very useful against those pest attack, for example. So you know, that's my reason for, in a sense, wanting to get the story into a much more sophisticated and cohesive whole, so that we can, you know, have more strings to pull. Okay. And become more sophisticated, as it were. Now, so that idea of just how we can see these four activities in a more complex manner, and that sort of leads me to appreciating, let's say, why Steiner changed the words every time he went from a different layer of activity. So we're talking in the ethers, you know, he talks about the warmth ether and the light ether, chemical ether, life ether. And so that's the band of the ethers. But when he comes to the 8th lecture, well, all through the course, actually, from the 2nd lecture, 4th, 6th, 8th, in those lectures, he talks a lot about these cosmic and earthly activities. And you can see all through those lectures that he does talk about cosmic forces, cosmic substance, earthly forces, earthly substance. And these are called the physical formative forces. So while we've got the etheric formative forces, we actually have these physical formative forces that we need to work with. And in the medical lectures, he talks about another layer that is even below that in the physical, and they're called organisms. And so he talks about the warmth organism and the light organism and the, water organism. And these are, in a sense, below the ethers. So the ethers can work into these physical structures that are created, by the spirit working into the physical. And some of the illnesses that he talks about is how the spirit leaves the warmth organism. So the warmth organism's still there. It's still present in the physical body, but it's not being stimulated by the spirit in the same way. So it's a very interesting picture of layers. His whole story is lots and lots of layers. And but every time he changes layers, he changes the words. And he doesn't give us a glossary. I've done that with my gyroscopic sort of pictures and so on, but he doesn't do it. He doesn't sort of give us this clear sort of association of words. And so that is a source of major confusion for people. But one of the interesting things is that when he calls cosmic substance, it's not just a sort of physical residue of the astral activity. It's actually also including the spirit. And so, the spirit as a secondary player, but nevertheless, it is talking about this compound thing of astral and spirit activity functioning in the metabolic system. So, looking at his words is always a very, very important thing. And so what we've talked about so far is the second lecture. We talked about that quite a bit, and I think we then went on and talked about the fourth lecture to some degree, when we were talking about manure and what 500 is and things like that. What I would like to do today is talk about the third lecture and the fifth lecture, because as I just said a minute ago, there seems to be a sort of pattern where in the second, fourth, sixth and eighth lectures, you'll see he's talking about these cosmic and earthly activities very strongly. And then in the third and the fifth lectures, funnily enough, he talks more about the energetic activities of spirit, astral, etheric and physical more directly. And I do have to say that in the fourth lecture, when he's talking about manure, he flips back into astral and etheric conversation. But otherwise, there's a lot of cosmic and earthly there. Now, the interesting thing about the third lecture is that he gives us this very powerful picture of how these five sisters of protein work and act as these anchors into the physical reality. However, this lecture is a source of huge confusion within the biodynamic community. Now, in this lecture, he's basically talking about these four basic elements of carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen, and how they, of course, make up carbohydrates and proteins. And then he talks about how sulfur sort of works through those four elements as a kind of oil that allows those four elements to all work together. And he makes this stunning statement, really, that these four elements are the elements that act as the physical anchors of these cosmic activities. Now, what that means is that, we can see that our physical bodies and everything physical around us is sort of built upon carbon, and that carbon is, in a sense, this physical contact point for the earthly activities that are coming from our planet. And then when we look out into the atmosphere, we can see that, of course, it would be 100% nitrogen atmosphere if it wasn't for the 20% oxygen that's been liberated from various minerals by living processes. Blue-green algae and other plants are liberating this oxygen into the atmosphere to give us a 20% oxygen that allows us to live. It allows us to feed our life body. Now, that life body is best experienced when we get tired. We're feeling great and we carry on our day, and then after a while we really feel tired, worn out, so we go to sleep and we wake up again and we're refreshed and off we go again. So that's the energy of the etheric body that we're dealing with, and that comes through the oxygen. It is literally carried by the oxygen element into us. So wherever the oxygen goes, so goes this life quality. I don't know if I commented before, but there's this wonderful correspondence between the energetic resonance of the Schaumann cavity, which is this area between the ionosphere of our atmosphere and the Earth, that's running at 7.8 hertz, and then our own electrical pulse is 7.8 hertz as well. And so, again, there's this sort of correspondence between this living activity of the atmosphere and our living processes.
Okay.
Now, as I commented about our atmosphere, without the oxygen, it would be 100% nitrogen. And so this is what is around all of the planets, that there's this atmosphere of nitrogen around the planets. And so we find that nitrogen is this element that carries this planetary force into life. And if we have a look at what nitrogen is and does, it acts as a poison very, very quickly. It combines with carbon and hydrogen, and it forms poisons. And what poisons do to us when we have too much nitrogen, of course, is we start to hallucinate. We start to have hypersensitivity. All of our senses become, really sharp. And as it goes on, we begin to hallucinate and live in a complete sort of fantasy world. Now, this is our astral body. This is the realm of our feelings and imaginations and psychology and so on. So this is where this nitrogen element is carried. And then, of course, we have the stars. And the stars are burning hydrogen. Hydrogen is the smallest element. It's the first element in the periodic table. And this hydrogen is converted into helium, and then the stars burn this for many billions of years. And so this is where we can see that this hydrogen element is really the physical carrier of the spirit activity. Now, in the agriculture lectures, this isn't clear. This story, the story about the carbon and the oxygen and the nitrogen is relatively clear, especially the oxygen and nitrogen. There's no doubt that the oxygen is etheric and that the nitrogen is carrying the astral. However, within the biodynamic community, you will find that when we come to who is the spirit, who is carrying the spirit into manifestation, we find people saying it's carbon, and we find people saying it's sulfur, and we find some people saying it's hydrogen. Now, part of the problem here is that Steiner only allotted hydrogen in this story to carrying away the spirit back into the cosmos. At death, the spirit sort of is carried on hydrogen, but he didn't talk about how the spirit comes into manifestation. But in the medical lectures in 1921 and then in 1922, in October of 1922, there's two little books there that are very, very clear in this statement that the spirit is carried in hydrogen and so on. Now, in the agriculture lectures, where he's making comments that carbon is providing the form for the spirit to manifest, that's true. It's not that it's a wrong statement, it's just not fully clarified. And basically in chemistry, what we see is that hydrogen attaches to carbon very early on in chemical processes. And so we have to read there, wherever he's talking about carbon, we have to read how it's the hydrogen standing behind the carbon that's being brought into manifestation, and that yes, carbon is the vehicle for the spirit, but it's like a passenger on a bus. Carbon is the bus, and hydrogen is the passenger, and the same with sulfur. We have to see that sulfur, I think, is something like the 16th element in the periodic table, and so sulfur, with the spirit being the original element in chemistry, and sulfur being the 16th element, it's a little bit hard to believe that sulfur is going to be this element that carries the spirit, because, what's happened to the earlier 15 elements, as it were. So Interestingly enough, though, that when we come to sulfur and we start looking at that whole ring of elements that sulfur is part of, we come to phosphorus, silica, aluminium, magnesium, sodium, chlorine, and argon. All of these elements are elements of light and warmth. Every one of those is somehow carrying this light and warmth impulse. And that's an interesting question in itself. What is it about that group of elements that makes them this cornerstone of manifestation, but through this carrying of light and warmth? That's a whole nother discussion, obviously. But it's an interesting clarifying point. You know, how could sulfur be the carrier of the spirit? And so this is where this third lecture becomes so much clearer when we look at the medical lectures, that hydrogen is this element of the spirit. And what's so powerful about this lecture, like as I said, he gave it in the medical lectures as well, but this image of these sort of cosmic forces being carried into matter through the elements of protein gives us an incredibly practical energetic chemistry. And I'm very certain that if we look at the chemical formula of anything, we are able to directly translate it into what its energetic activity will be as a medicine, as an element. And this is one of Steiner's greatest gifts, I reckon, is this connection between energetic activities and physical matter through protein. So that's the third lecture. And I think it's very important for the whole of the biodynamic story that third lecture is clarified, because, you know, as you may have heard yourself, Alan, there's quite this misunderstanding around that.
Yeah.
Now, in this same vein, there's a little quirky piece in there that I find fascinating in the third lecture, where Steiner talks about how nitrogen attaches to carbon very readily, and of course calcium as part of that process, really sucking the nitrogen in, and then it's the nitrogen that takes hold of the oxygen and brings that oxygen body into activity. And this can sound a little bit odd at times, but of course when we're looking at chemistry, we see all the anaerobic chemistry sort of tends to start first. And so we have carbon joining with hydrogen to give us a methane, and carbon joining with nitrogen to give us cyanide sort of elements. And it's only later that we get aerobic chemistry starting to take place once the oxygen comes into that process. So it's quite a good picture. But when we were talking about the equisetum and about that whole process of stimulating the kidneys back into function again, we're again talking about this process where the astral body is needed, the movement of the astral body is needed to come along and pick up the fat, sluggish, etheric, the bundle of water, and bring it into movement. That we need this astral activity to be moving the water. And we know this from flow forms, that we need to get the oxygen into the water through the flow forms to bring it back to life. And so interestingly, we have that same image sitting there in the third lecture. But I've got to say, it certainly seemed a little unclear to me, at the beginning. That the more that I've lived with it, the more it's a very good, valuable image. Okay, so we can sort of segue from here into the fifth lecture, and this fifth lecture is where Steiner's talking about the preparation plants, and And it's an interesting story because, of course, the thing that arises out of the whole lecture is in a sense that the course is about how we're going to control nitrogen. If there's a central theme, that's it. That nitrogen, is this toxic poison that can cause all sorts of trouble. And how do we get it so that we can bring it into the sort of earthly sphere in such a manner that it's stable and uses its moving and activating processes to stimulate life rather than to kill life. And so as we go through the preparations, he's continually sort of talking about the way calcium and sulfur and potassium are going to help to anchor anchor the nitrogen. And of course, in the fourth lecture, where he was talking about composting and the manure process, he was talking the same thing. How through composting and through 500 and so on can we help to calm down the nitrogen. And it's an interesting phenomena that all of the preparations are in some way working to corral nitrogen. And generally today in biodynamics, of course, we get people focusing upon the mineral comments that he makes around these different preparations. And so far as to say, if we use the yarrow, we can use that to be stimulating potassium and calcium. And so there's this whole theology developing around them as being mineral controllers. And then, of course, where you started from, there's another theology where they're all just biological inoculants. And so we're just using those to do this. And I've got to say, in America, Pfeiffer, being the first generation, was really attempting to get biodynamics onto the earth. And so he tended to upplay the biological reality and downplay the energetic reality of all these things, from my impression. And the next generation tended to do the same. People like Kopf, in his book, he was really focusing on the scientific realities of biodynamics. And I've got to say, I feel it's now my generation's task to bring back the energetic, bring back this knowledge of the fact that it is biological forces that we're playing with. And this is what is one of the streams running through the biodynamic preparations in the fifth lecture, is that Steiner gives these insights into the energetic activity of the preparations. Now, he basically, I think, he only gives in a clear statement of energetic activities of 3 of these preparations, just from memory here. And so these, for example, when he's talking about the oak bark preparation, he talks a lot about fungal problems, and he talks about how this oak bark preparation is helping to get the life processes, the watery processes that are too active in some rot funguses, and get that etheric activity and pull it back into the earth. And then we can see with the chamomile preparation that this is just stimulating that etheric activity. And so, on the one hand, we've got this interplay where we can stimulate this etheric watery activity, and we can then grab that and sort of bring it back into the earth. And he makes this comment about the oak bark, that it will pull this etheric activity back into the earth without any shocks or disturbances. And so it's just this sort of integrating it back into the physical environment. Because, of course, if we get too much etheric activity, we get a lot of rots, but we also get sucking insects that are just relishing that sort of excessive flow of sap. And so we get that image of the aphids on the roses in the springtime. That's just this too strong etheric. And the solution to that is often a spray of 501 in the spring, and that just pushes back that sort of strong upward moving etheric. But we could also use oak bark, you see. Mm-hmm. Now, if we just continue on, I'm pretty sure Steiner talked about the yarrow preparation, and in there, I know Leavegood states this probably more clearly than Steiner does, but he starts talking about how in that yarrow preparation we've got this process where this etheric activity is needing to open up to receive that cosmic process from above. And so we've got these forces of light and warmth coming from above and wanting to fertilize the plant. But the plant can't be fertilized if it's not open to that. So in a sense, the flower has to form and it has to open so that the bee can come into it. And this is what the yarrow preparation does. It sort of opens this etheric growth process and allows the Mars fertilizing process to come in. And so it's interesting then when we move to the stinging nettle preparation that while we can say, there's this desire to fertilize and strengthen this astral activity, the stinging nettle preparation is actually more of a harmonizing preparation rather than a stimulating preparation. And as I said, the whole aim is to control the nitrogen. We don't want to stimulate the nitrogen too much. And so when we look at the stinging nettle plant, it's this interesting sort of mixture of water and light in that, it has quite a big flat leaf. It likes to grow in swampy, shady sides of rivers. But then we have this strong sort of light process entering where we have all those little prickles forming on the sides. The leaves tend to be serrated. We have this uric acid sting that's sort of living inside the plant. And so in the whole gesture of that plant, we're getting this sort of intermingling of this watery activity and this light activity taking place. And so just as the yarrow is opening up, as it were, to allow that astral to come in, so the stinging nettle is acting as a very gentle harmonizing of these forces, but bringing that fertilization into the plant. We then move on to the dandelion plant, which is talked about as being very strong, pardon me, in its process with silicic acid. And in the deep taproot, in the fine flower, spherical sort of flower of these little silica puffballs, we're seeing that this plant is again opening up the light and the warmth environment to be drawn into the etheric life sphere, as it were. And he makes a big comment about how this makes the plant sensitive to its environment so that it can draw whatever it needs from a wide environment. And this is very much a Jupiter sort of activity. And then the last preparation he talks about is valerian. Now, he doesn't say much about valerian other than it stimulates the phosphoric substance. And I guess in a way this is where the medical lectures come in again, because he talks a lot about phosphorus in the medical lectures, and it is the element that incarnates the spirit. We need phosphorus in our brains so that we can dissolve the aluminium. And he gives this whole story about how, in a sense, our back brain, which is actually more related to chlorine, Our back brain is our movie theatre. We can just sit there and we can just watch all these images go past the television screen of our mind. But to actually bring those images into conscious thought, we need phosphorus. And that's what moves us to our front brain. That's what incarnates our sort of conscious spirit, and allows us to make clear, objective, rational thoughts. And so this is where we can get a fuller picture that this Valerian preparation is helping to incarnate the spirit. And so now we have a set of preparations that can completely control the 4 energetic activities. We can stimulate the etheric body. We can bring that into the physical body and keep it earthed so it's useful. We can open that etheric body up so that the spirit and astral can come into that to make for fertility. We can stimulate the light qualities, and we can also bring in the director. And this is what the spirit is. It's the architect in the building process. That we have the spirit is the architect, the design, the archetype of whatever we're wanting. The astral body is really the head contractor. He's the guy that's going to get the motion and get the ideas and put them into practice. The etheric activity is really the workers who are going to do the work, and the physical body is all the building materials. Now, the thing is, if we take out the architect, of course, the master builder's just going to sort of run around and put a window here and put something over there. And, if we take out the master builder, the workers are all going to sit down and do nothing at all. And so we've got to have these 4 players active. And so we need this spirit activity to be very present in our agriculture, as well as anything else. And so by one of the things, once I saw this, once I sort of understood that these preparations are working directly on these energetic activities, then it became clear to me that these biodynamic preparations are a complete system in themselves. And therefore that all illnesses should be able to be addressed just using the preparations. And so this has been, my work for the last 30 years is to prove that thesis, as it were. And as you know, I've made bird remedies, rabbit remedies, I've made a whole range of plant control remedies, but I've also made a range of human remedies that I've been using myself for the last 30 years as my main healthcare system. And, I've pretty much proven it to myself that this is true, that these preparations are a complete system. And of course, once we've got preparations that can control these 4 energetic activities, it means we can develop a science of them. Because, of course, today in biodynamics, basically you'll hear people talk about the etheric and the astral, but nothing else. And they talk about this etheric and astral within that context of this polarity. The astral is the contractive and the etheric is the expansive. And so, but they can't do much more with that. They can't use the preparations consciously to control pest and disease. Biodynamics is really 500, 501, use your cow pad pit and then go and use neem oil and copper and lime sulfur and all these organic solutions for your problems. And that's okay. That's what biodynamics is seen as. But in fact, we've got more than that. In the agriculture course, we're actually given this technical manual of what these energetic activities are, and then here are 8 preparations that you can use to control these energetic activities. And so it's really a fantastic document. In the history of humanity, I really believe it's going to stand up as anything that Aristotle or Pythagoras or any of these characters presented. the agriculture lectures, once we understand them and see what's really sitting in there. So, here we go. We've just about done an hour. Oh, damn, I didn't. Anyway, so have we? How are we going on time?
Well, we've got more time, or we can close when you're finished with the lecture. Go ahead.
No, you ask a question. It'd be good.
Well, you mentioned Leave Good, and Leave Good is not particularly somebody I'm familiar with. And would you mind doing a thumbnail on him?
Yeah. Okay. Now, Bernard Leafgood was a Dutch doctor. He's a Steiner anthroposophical doctor. He's very well respected in Holland in particular, but I think worldwide.
And did he actually work with Steiner?
As a very young person, he may have met him.
Okay.
I could imagine.
That's good enough.
He's only recently died, so he was really working through the 70s, 80s, 90s sort of time. And he was a cornerstone of what's called the social development work within anthroposophy. So this is a psychological social work that sort of has come out of Steiner's work, as it were. So that was his primary thing. And I think that went off into economics and, positive banking and all that sort of thing. But in 1951, he gave this talk to the biodynamic people, and that is called The Working of the Planets and the Life Processes in Man and Earth. And it's a study material from July of 1951. And it's quite a dense little booklet, but in there he sort of outlines the anthroposophical view of the planetary processes, and then he goes on and talks about the biodynamic preparations in regards to this, and so it's a very dense little book. And having a bit of a background of the medical lectures helps to understand what he's talking about. But we're very lucky that you may remember Dave Robson, from the early BD Now days.
Okay.
A chap in Oregon, Dave Robson, took that book and, in a sense, like it's already in English, but he translated it into modern English. And this is now available on the OregonBD.org website. And essentially you go onto their online course material, and it's one of the links at the bottom of the page there. Now, he sort of simplified it. He kept the general spirit of the whole book pretty well, but it does make it accessible so that we can sort of understand what Leafgood was getting at. Now, this, of course, we have to put this in a historical concept, in that, part of what I'm, complaining about modern biodynamics is this polar image of this above and below. And we sort of have to go back to Wachsmuth in 1924, when he wrote his book about the etheric formative forces, and he basically proposed this above and below as the physical, and then the above was the cosmic ether. And out of this comes this whole complex story about the ethers. And this still resides in biodynamics today. But of course, once the agriculture course became available to people in English, which was the first time, publicly in the 70s, people started to see that Steiner was talking about the astral body an awful lot, and not just the ethers. And so the story sort of morphed, and the ethers became actually the earthly expansive force from below, and the astral becomes the contractive force from above. But still we have this concept that this world ether is the controller of all of the growth forces, which of course is quite incorrect. because the story I've just told this morning is telling us that the stars is the director, not the ethers that are living in the world atmosphere. And so this confusion that is still very present in biodynamics leads to all sorts of distortions as to what the astral is and what their spirit is and how they all work together. So the point is that in 1951, Leafgood, a medical doctor, stood up and tried to clarify this quite confusing mess that was left over from Wachsmuth. And he hasn't been very successful, because you'll find in most of the education that's being offered in America and Europe today, we still have this theology of the ethers being the prime directive growth forces. And but, Leafgood basically, right in his first introductory page, says, look, it's not okay just to talk about the ethers. We have to see that creation occurs by the stars, the planets, the atmosphere, and the earth forces all working together. And then he goes off and starts talking about the planetary forces, because Steiner didn't enlarge on these. He talked about the outer planets and the inner planets in the agriculture course, but he didn't really enlarge on them at all. And so here comes Leafgood to tell us how this other layer of creation is really affecting plant growth and life systems. And then, of course, he goes on and connects them into the preparations. And so, it's an incredibly valuable work. And I was just thinking the other day that I'm quite heartened that this is now in the conversation, the biodynamic conversation. That, Enzo Nastati talks about this quite a lot in his work, and that's filtering through parts of the world. The fact that the Oregon Biodynamics site has it sitting there is good. And in various articles and things, I'm now seeing this greater appreciation of the planetary activities that Leafgood brought starting to show up. So, it's a very positive thing. But just to say, in the historical content, from what I can see, this is the first attempt by the medical movement to help the biodynamic movement out of their sort of childlike confusion of the ethers. And so that's really his place. Now, just to clarify, there was 3 or 4 other attempts to move biodynamics beyond the ethers. And one is very present in Ernst Marty's book, The Ethers, and then, of course, Bockermühl's book, Towards a Phenomenology of the Etheric World, that he wrote with Poppelbaum, who was a contemporary of Wachsmuth. And in that book, Poppelbaum states very clearly that we got it wrong, that we didn't include the astrality and spirit strongly enough in our understanding, and that we need to do that. And then again in the 2000s, there's this book called the Schiller Papers, of which it's a document that's outlining a lot of various research that anthroposophists have done over the years. And in there's a very clear statement again about the need for all 4 activities in our conversation. So there has been this attempt to move biodynamics along, but I've got to say, I don't think it's been very successful. And hence why I'm more than happy to be talking about this again now, because, after 90 years, we still have this very simplistic organics plus the preps form of biodynamic agriculture.
Yeah. Okay, that's it's really powerful. And I've been telling people that if they'll ask questions at the blog page for this podcast, that you'll be willing to take a shot at answering questions.
Most definitely.
I appreciate that.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you again.
Yeah, well, thank you again.
Yeah.
we'll talk more next week.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. We'll see you then.
Okay, thanks, Glenn.